Hello friends, welcome to the next episode of Mountain of the Moon. In last episode we heard that, after crossing the vast African veldt for many days, they have seen Richtersveld's range finally. The people of the Matabeles appeared in front of the tent. They suspected that Shankar and Alvarez had come to find the diamond mine. Alvarez tackled them somehow. Richtersveld's mountains are huge, it's dangerous at every step, and fear of losing the way. Mountain of the Moon, written by Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay. Episode 6. Alvarez put the usual strong tobacco in his pipe, and started smoking. He said,
"Did you know, Shankar, in these remote forests of Africa, there are many animals, still unknown to scientists. Only a few people from outside Africa have explored these forests. A mammal, called okapi, was first seen here in 1900. There is a species of wild boar, they are 3 times the size of normal boars. In 1888, an explorer and a famous hunter, Moses Crowley, first came across the species in the Lualaba jungle of Belgian Congo. With great difficulty, he managed to shoot one of them, and presented the specimen to the New York Zoological Museum. Have you heard of the Rhodesian monster?"
Shankar replied, "No, what is it?"
"I will tell you. There is a large marsh to the north of Rhodesia. Many local tribesmen say they have seen an extraordinary animal in that marsh. They say the animal's head is like a crocodile's, but it has a horn like the rhino. It has a long neck, but has scales. It has a body like a hippo, but the tail again is like that of a crocodile. It is a huge animal, and is believed to be exceedingly ferocious. No one has seen the creature outside water. But I find these descriptions difficult to believe." However, in 1880, a prospector by name James Martin had trekked extensively in the area in search of gold. Martin had been the aide-de-camp of General Matthew. He was also a geologist and zoologist rolled into one. In his diary, he has written, he saw the Rhodesian monster, near the Coverando Lake. He says the animal looks like prehistoric dinosaurs. It was huge. But unfortunately, James Martin did not get a clear view. He saw it from a distance through a dense early morning fog in the marshlands. The animal made a sound like the neigh of a horse. And it was enough to send his Zulu porters scurrying for safety. As they ran, they screamed, "Sahib, run, it's a dingonek." Zulus call it dingonek. The animal is rarely seen. But it is so destructive that the local people panic whenever they see it. James Martin wrote that he had fired twice from his 303 rifle, but most probably he missed the animal from such a great distance. It dived into the water, maybe, because of the sound of the gunshot.
Shankar asked him, "How did you get these details? Has the diary been published?"
"No, it has not been. Many years ago, Bulawayo Chronicle ran a story on the encounter. At that time, I had just come to Africa. I too was in Rhodesia and naturally, I got interested in the story. I kept the newspaper clipping for quite some time. Then somehow, it got lost. It was the newspaper that christened the animal as the Rhodesian monster."
Shankar said, "Have you ever come across any strange, unknown animal?" Something extraordinary happened then. By then, darkness had fallen upon the forest. In the fading light, Shankar saw, he might have been mistaken, but Shankar thought he saw that the strong, fearless Alvarez, the hardened hunter, and adventurer Alvarez, was taken aback when he heard the question. And then, Shankar suddenly feel that a shiver ran down his body. Alvarez looked around, as if in a daze, and scanned the cheerless jungle, and the mysterious steep mountain, without saying a word. It was as if he was reliving a horrendous experience he had long ago, an experience that he would rather forget. Alvarez was scared. This was unreal. Shankar never thought Alvarez could be frightened. But Alvarez was indeed scared. And his fear cast its dark shadow over Shankar too. It was as if this unknown, mysterious forest, protected by an invincible wall of a steep mountain, had been hiding some secret for ages. It threw a challenge to the brave and the fearless. Come in, try to unravel my mystery, but be prepared to die. The Richtersveld mountain is not like the Himalayas, the lord of all mountains, and the abode of the gods. Like some of the inhabitants of this mysterious continent, the Richtersveld soul too is cruel, brutal, and starving for human flesh. Thereafter, 2 days later, they were moving deeper into the forest, slowly. The terrain was not flat, it kept rising and falling forever. On their way, they came across patches of tall, rough, tussock grass. Water was scarce. In between, although they came across a few streams, Alvarez would not let Shankar touch the water. It was difficult for a thirsty Shankar not to drink the crystal clear, cool water flowing down the springs. But Alvarez insisted that Shankar drink cold tea instead. Cold tea hardly quenched his thirst. Of all the hardships Shankar faced, scarcity of drinking water was the worst. One morning, they woke up at a place where the tussock was dense. A thick fog hung over the area around their tent. Late in the morning, when the fog cleared for a while, Shankar saw a steep, imposing ascent, blocking their way in front. He could not make out how high it was, as its top was hidden behind clouds. Alvarez said,
"The main range of the Richtersveld."
Shankar asked, "Do we have to cross this?"
"Yes, we have to. Because the last time around, Jim and I approached this mountain from the south. We reached the foothills of the main range, but did not cross it. The stream, where we had found the yellow diamond, flows from east to west. Now we are going from north to south. Therefore, we have to cross over to the other side of this mountain, to reach the stream."
Shankar said, "The fog is so dense. Shall we wait for some time? I think it would be better if we started after some time." They did not break camp and instead had a leisurely breakfast. Till midday, the fog did not lift. Shankar fell asleep in the tent. When he woke up, it was almost dark. As he came out of the tent rubbing his eyes, he found Alvarez studying the map. His brow furrowed. He said,
"Shankar, we have a long way to go. See what is in front of us."
When Shankar looked up, he was awestruck. The fog had cleared. The main range of the Richtersveld mountains rose before them, right up to the sky. The waist of the mountain was covered by thick thunderclouds. But the peak, gorgeously lit up by the setting sun, stood like the golden pinnacle of a heavenly temple against the backdrop of a deep blue sky. It would be impossible to climb the incline they faced. It was steep and offered hardly any foothold. After a long pause, Alvarez said,
"We cannot cross the mountain from here. I am sure you will agree. Let's go westwards. We will go around the mountain till we find a pass low enough. We will cross at that point. But it might take us more than a month to find an appropriate pass in this 150-mile range."
However, fortunately, after walking for just 6 days towards the west, they came across a place where the mountain slope was much flatter. They decided to climb across the mountain from there. Next morning, when they started climbing up, Shankar's watch showed 6:30. By 8:30, he felt extremely tired. They had climbed 6,000 feet in just 4 miles, so you can understand how difficult the ascent was. Besides, the higher they went, the denser the jungle became. It was nearly dark. At that time, the sun would have been high up in the sky, but no sunlight penetrated the thick foliage. They could hardly see the sky. There was no trail. Only endless arrays of ancient tree trunks rose along the mountain slope, trying to touch the sky. The jungle floor was damp and slippery, and the rocks were covered with moss, though Shankar could not make out where the water came from. If they slipped, they would fall hundreds of feet below and would be battered by sharp rocks. Shankar and Alvarez, neither of them spoke. Half exhausted by the steep climb, they were breathing heavily. Shankar suffered more. He had been brought up on the plains of Bengal, and had no experience of rock climbing. But he went on doggedly, hoping Alvarez would call it a day. Yet, he was determined to climb till his last breath. He would not admit to Alvarez that he could climb no more. Alvarez might think the people of the East Indies were weaklings. He was representing India in this inaccessible mountain forest. He would not let his country down. It was a lovely forest. As if a fairyland. Streams cascaded down the mountain slope, and trees were teeming with birds, which dazzled Shankar with their magnificent array of colors. There were lovely white flowers on tall grass, and orchids hung from branches and trunks of trees everywhere. Suddenly, on a tree, Shankar saw some monkeys with long beards. They looked like tiny sadhus. And it seemed as if they were contemplating something seriously. As if they were actually saintly creatures. Alvarez said,
"Those are the females of the colobus monkeys. The males of the species do not have beards, but the females have long beards and mustaches. And they are very serious, as you can see."
Shankar was amused by the antics of those strange creatures. They moved on. Under their feet, there was neither hard soil nor rock. Instead, there was a layer of soggy, rotten leaves and the stubs of uprooted trees. Leaves have been piling up in these forests for centuries. They fall, decay, and get covered by moss and toadstools. On these, dry leaves, broken branches and uprooted trees keep falling. The cycle goes on. In certain places, the layer of decayed vegetation was as much as 60 to 70 feet deep. The terrain was dangerous. Alvarez taught Shankar how he could save himself.
There were patches where a man, if he stepped on casually, could suddenly disappear within a deep layer of decayed vegetation, and die of suffocation.
Shankar recalled that, in their villages too, there were unused wells, into which people sometimes fell if they were careless. Shankar said, "We have to cut our way through. It's becoming too thick." The razor-sharp elephant grass was like double-edged Roman swords. And what was worse, they could not see beyond a few feet there. They knew only too well that danger might strike them at any moment. It could be anything: leopards, snakes. At times, Shankar heard distant drumbeats floating in from somewhere deep in the forest. He wondered whether the drums were being played by the tribesmen. When he asked Alvarez, Alvarez said,
"Those are not drums. Some baboons, or big apes, beat their chest, and produce a drum-like sound. There is no question of humans living in this forest."
Shankar said, "But did not you say there were no gorillas here?"
"Not gorillas, but there are other apes, which make such a sound by beating their chest. As far as I know, gorillas are found only in some regions of Belgian Congo, Rwenzori Alps, and the volcanic mountains of Virunga."
After reaching 4,500 feet, they called it a day, and pitched their tent. At night, there were innumerable sounds, in that authentic tropical rainforest. Shankar was overcome by a sense of awe, laced with amazement. The nighttime sounds of a huge rainforest are so diverse, and so scary that, Shankar could not close his eyes that night. It was not fear alone. It was fear mixed with wonder. What a medley of sounds, the laughter of hyenas, the screeching noise of the colobus monkeys, apes beating chests, and leopards growling. In nature's own zoo. No one seemed to sleep at night. The midnight forest seemed to be possessed by a spirit. Shankar recalled that a few years ago, a circus troupe had camped in a field next to their school hostel. The circus animals howled through the night, making sleep difficult for the hostel boys. But more than any other sound, a cold sweat ran down Shankar's spine when he heard elephants trumpeting close to their tent. He woke up Alvarez. But Alvarez said calmly,
"There is fire outside our tent, they won't come this way."
Next morning, they started again. Climbing at a stretch, they passed through a dense jungle of bamboo grass. Underneath were wild ginger plants. On their left, within 50 yards of their path, a huge herd of elephants went by, trampling the green bamboo shoots with a ferocious sound. At a height of 5,000 feet, there was a riot of colors with wild flowers in full bloom. There were bright red erythronium on tall trees. The flowers of the Ipomoea creepers reminded Shankar of the Bon Calmi flowers back home, although these flowers were of a lighter shade of violet. The air seemed to be heavy, with the fragrance of the white veronicas. Wild coffee plants were in bloom, and so were the colorful begonias. It was nature's own garden in among clouds, literally. At times, the treetops were hidden by white clouds, and at other times, clouds drifted down to wet the veronica bushes. It took them 2 more days to reach a height of 7,500. The climb had been grueling all the way. Shankar had a terrible pain in his lower back. And the landscape changed drastically when they reached that height. The trees at this level were different. The trunks and branches were covered with thick moss. Moss hung from branches too, some of them so long that they almost reached the ground. The hanging moss swayed gently when a breeze passed through. There was not much sunlight, it was twilight through the day. Above all, an eerie silence sat heavily upon that frosty jungle. No sound of wind blowing, no bird singing, no animal howling, and no man had ever spoken there. It was as if they had reached hell and stood amongst a crowd of long-bearded phantoms. In the afternoon, Alvarez decided to stop for the day, a little earlier than on other days. Shankar sat outside the tent drinking coffee. It seemed the jungles had not changed since the beginning of life on Earth, when the plants had not taken the shapes that we see today, when enormous creatures had roamed freely in dark forests that covered the earth. Shankar felt he had magically traveled back in time. They lit a fire outside their tent, as night descended quickly. But in that absolute dark, their fire was just a faint glimmer of light. Nothing could be seen beyond its small ring. Shankar was also surprised by the pin-drop silence in that part of the forest. He could not figure out why there was none of the wide medley of nighttime sounds they had heard all these days, rather, nights. Alvarez was studying the map with deep furrows in his brow. Alvarez said,
"Shankar, I was thinking, we have climbed almost 8,000 feet, but we still have not found the pass, through which we expected to cross over to the other side of the range. How much more can we climb? What would we do if the saddle was not in this part of the mountain?"
The same doubt had crossed Shankar's mind too. That day, while climbing, he had looked up through their field glass a number of times. But throughout the day, the higher ranges had been buried under clouds, and he had not been able to see anything. How much higher could they climb? What, if they did not find a flat pass to cross over? Shankar did not even want to think of the possibility that they would have to go down and start climbing from another point all over again. He asked, "What do you see in the map?" From the expression on Alvarez's face, it seemed he had lost faith in his map. After a short pause, he said,
"This map does not give much details. Who has ever climbed this mountain and charted a reliable map? This range has not been surveyed. The map we have was drawn by Sir Filippo de Philip, who became famous after climbing the Fernando Pa Peak in Portuguese West Africa. A few years ago, he participated in an expedition led by the great mountaineer and explorer, the Duke of Abruzzi. But Sir Philip did not actually cross the Richtersveld. I don't think the contours shown in this map are accurate. I don't really follow."
Suddenly, Shankar interrupted him. What was that? First, there was a muffled sound just outside their tent. Then they heard someone coughing painfully, like a terminally ill tuberculosis patient would. They heard it once. Twice. Then it stopped. It was clear that the sound had not been from a human being. Immediately, he took his gun and was about to leave the tent, but Alvarez stopped him hurriedly.
"Stop, don't go."
Shankar was stunned. He asked, "What was that sound?" As he looked at Alvarez, and in the glimmer of the fire, he was amazed to see that Alvarez's face had turned pale, as if it was drained of all blood. Was it because of what he had heard just then? What on earth could make Diego Alvarez react like that? The next moment, they heard a heavy, fleet-footed animal moving away through the jungle, beyond the small area lit by the campfire. Neither of them said anything for some time. Then Alvarez said,
"Put some more wood into the fire, and make sure our rifles are loaded."
His voice was so grim that Shankar did not dare to ask him anything more. The night passed without any incident. The next morning, Shankar woke up first. He had to light a fire to make coffee. And he went a short distance away from the tent to gather wood. Suddenly he saw a footprint on the soft ground. It was more than 11 inches long. It had only 3 toes. The impression was very clear. He followed the footprints for a few hundred feet. There were a number of them. They had only 3 toes. Shankar recalled what Alvarez had told him at the Ugandan railway station. The story of Jim Carter's horrendous death. The footprint, with 3 toes on the sand, at the entrance of the cave. He also recalled what the chief of the tribesmen had said. And that brought back to his mind the pale, frightened face of Alvarez the night before. On another day too, when they had camped at the foothills, Alvarez had been similarly terrified. Bunyip. The ferocious bunyip of the tribal chief's tale. The terror of the Richtersveld mountain and forest. The bunyip that makes sure that neither men nor animals venture into this wilderness 8,000 feet above the sea level. The reason why they had not heard any animal the previous night struck him in a flash. Even Alvarez turned white on hearing its voice. Perhaps he had heard the coughing noise earlier. Next morning, Alvarez got up a little late. After a mug of hot coffee and a light breakfast, he was transformed back to the fearless and brave Alvarez, who could challenge anyone, man or demon. Shankar deliberately did not show Alvarez the footprints of the unknown animal. Who knows, he might decide to go back, and start afresh from another point, to look for the saddle. Soon, it started raining heavily. Rainwater danced down the mountain slope, in thousands of rivulets. It continued raining through the day. After waiting for some time, at 10 in the morning, Alvarez decided to start, much to his companion's disappointment. Shankar saw no point in getting drenched. He thought nothing much would be lost if they waited there for a day. That morning, Shankar discovered another side of a working-class European, how seriously he took his work. They climbed through the day, through pouring rains. Drenched to the bones. Shankar was exhausted by the never-ending journey. All their provisions, tent, and clothes were wet. They did not have even a dry handkerchief between them. Shankar felt his body and mind were going numb. By evening, when the dark mountain rainforest looked frighteningly somber under an overcast sky, Shankar wondered why he had undertaken such a long journey in an alien land, through an unknown forest with ferocious animals, towards an uncertain diamond reserve, or possibly, to an even more uncertain, unknown death. He hardly knew Alvarez. Why on earth was he following Alvarez? He did not really care for diamonds. His thatched house in Bengal, the serene village alleys shaded by familiar trees, their shallow river, the sweet trills of birds, he had known since his childhood. Now, all that seemed to be a part of a dreamlike unreality. No diamond reserve of Africa could be more precious than his home. But later in the night, when the moon rose in a cloudless sky, he got over his dark thoughts. The splendor of the moonlit night defied description. Shankar was no longer on earth, there was no place called Bengal. Everything melted into a fascinating dream. He did not want diamonds, did not want wealth, but neither did he want to return anywhere. Far beyond the temporal world, he now belonged to a lily-white Elysium. No man had ever seen the beauty that cradled him now. No man had ever listened to such absorbing silence. The remote, enormous Richtersveld mountain and forest, in the depth of the night, were kneeling down to meditate on itself, in this kingdom of clouds. Rarely does a man have the good fortune to visit such a world. He woke up from his sleep with a start, as he heard Alvarez call him urgently.
Shankar. Shankar. Get up, pick up the rifle.
What is it? Then he listened carefully. Something was moving around their tent. Its labored breathing could be heard. There was complete darkness outside as the moon had set. The last rays of the moonlight were reflected by the treetops. The fire in front of their tent was burning weakly, but it was so small that it threw hardly any light. Suddenly, there was a loud noise. It seemed a huge monster had just snapped a branch of a tree, and it was moving away hastily through darkness. As if it had realized that the people in the tent had woken up, and it would not be able to catch them unawares. Whatever the animal may be, it was intelligent and alert. Alvarez went out, with a torch and a rifle. Shankar followed him. In the light of the torch, they saw the shrubs in the northeastern side of their camp had been flattened out completely, as if a steamroller had passed over them. Alvarez fired 2 shots in that direction. There was no response in any side. While returning to the tent, both of them saw footprints, quite close to the campfire. deep imprints of 3 toes on the wet ground. The animal was not scared away by fire. Shankar tried to imagine what might have happened if Alvarez had not got up. The unknown terror would not have hesitated to enter their tent, and Shankar could not think what would have followed. Alvarez said,
"Shankar, you complete your sleep, I will stand guard."
Shankar said, "No, you sleep, I will stay awake." Alvarez smiled and said,
"That would be crazy. You would not be able to do anything, even if you were awake. Go, sleep. See, there is lightning in the distance. It's going to rain again. The night will be over soon, sleep for some time." "Until then, I'll have a coffee."
With dawn came torrential rains accompanied by the sound and fury of intense lightning. The rains continued through the day, there was no respite. Shankar felt it was the apocalypse, the final, deciding deluge that would drown the world. The god of destruction had decided to demolish the earth. The rain was so fierce that even Alvarez was downbeat. He did not talk of taking down the tent. It stopped raining by 5 in the afternoon. Shankar felt it would have been better if the rain had not stopped, because immediately Alvarez instructed him to pack up and start. The easygoing person in Shankar felt there was no need to start at that odd hour. This was one journey where time had no meaning. But for Alvarez, there was no difference between day and night, rain or shine, new moon or full moon. That night, they climbed the mountain through the rain-swept jungle, finding their way by the moonlight, seeping in through broken clouds. After some time, Alvarez called from behind.
"Shankar, stop. Look up."
In the clear moonlight, Alvarez was looking through his field glass at a mountain towards their left. Shankar took the field glass from him and saw the mountain pass, at last. It was not far from where they were, it was within 2 miles from them, towards the left. A beaming Alvarez said,
"Do you see the saddle? We won't stop until we reach there. We will camp on it."
Shankar was at the end of his tether. He regretted his decision to join this relentless Portuguese on an expedition. But he also knew that the basic rule of any expedition was that the leader could not be questioned, his orders had to be carried out without question. Though there was no written code, in all the major expeditions in history, this rule had been followed. Shankar, too, had to follow it. When they reached the saddle, after a non-stop climb, dawn was breaking. Shankar did not have the energy to move even another step. The saddle was wider than 3 miles. At one place, there was a steep rise of 200 feet, and at another, within a mile, there was a descent of 400 to 500 feet. The terrain, therefore, was not easy to negotiate. The relatively flat parts of the saddle were covered by bamboo grass, wild ginger plants, and tall trees like erythronium. There was a wide variety of orchids on the trees, and baboons and colobus monkeys were everywhere. After climbing down continuously for 2 more days, they reached the valley, on the other side of the main range of the Richtersveld. Shankar felt the jungle on this side was even more impenetrable. On the western coast of Africa, a part of the clouds formed over the Atlantic Ocean are stopped by the Cameroon Mountains. The rest reach the southern face of the Richtersveld. As a result, this region gets heavy showers and consequently, has a thick cover of rainforests. For 15 days, they searched for the river described by Alvarez in the dense jungles of that valley, but could not find it. They came across a number of rivulets, but every time Alvarez shook his head and said,
"No, this is not it. Not this one."
Shankar once again said, "Why don't you check your map?" By then, it had become quite clear that Alvarez's map was useless. He said,
"I don't need a map. That river and valley are permanently etched in my memory. I will recognize the place the moment I see it. This is not it. This is not the valley we are looking for."
They had no choice. They had to keep searching. A month went by. Then came the rainy season of Southwest Africa. It was dreadful. Shankar had got a glimpse of the intensity of rain while crossing the Richtersveld. A number of mighty streams cascaded down the mountain slope, determined to wash the valley away. There was not even a patch of land on which they could pitch their tent. One night, a narrow stream in front of their camp turned into a strong rivulet and almost washed away their camp. Once more, they survived because of Alvarez's alertness. Time moved slowly. One day, Shankar had an extraordinary experience that nearly killed him. Alvarez was cleaning his rifle in the tent, after which he would cook. Shankar went into the jungle in search of game. Alvarez had cautioned him to be extremely careful in the jungle and not to leave the tent without a loaded rifle. Alvarez had also asked him to keep a compass tied to his wrist and leave signs on trees along the path so that he could find his way back to the tent. Otherwise, he would be in trouble. On that day, Shankar went deep inside the jungle in search of the springbok antelope. He had started in the morning. When he was tired, he sat down under a large tree to take a breath. There were tall trees everywhere, and almost each one of them was covered with a creeper with small leaves. A profusion of creepers had covered the trees almost completely, and Shankar could not see their trunks. Nearby, by the side of a small waterhole, there were some flowering bushes. After he sat there for some time, he felt a little uneasy. He could not understand what exactly was wrong, but at the same time, he did not want to leave the place. He was tired, he felt sleepy. Shankar felt there was a pleasant, sweet smell in the air. He liked it. Then, his body began to feel numb. He wondered if it was an attack of malaria. To overcome the uneasiness, he lit a cheroot. A little later, when he picked up the matchbox from the ground and put it in his pocket, he felt as though his arm did not belong to him, but to someone else. It was as if it did not quite follow the commands given by his brain. Gradually, his entire body felt pleasantly numb. He wondered if there was any meaning of their expedition, the unending chase of a fantasy. Would not it be better to spend the rest of his life dreaming languidly under the pleasant shadows of this quiet forest? A part of his mind told him to get up immediately and return to their tent. And another part of his mind told him he was in serious trouble. But his numbness won the day. It was not just numbness, it was laced with the pleasure of getting drugged. The rest of the world became irrelevant. A pleasant paralysis spread over his body. Shankar rested his head on a root and lay down comfortably. Faint lines drawn by light and shade ran over the tall cottonwood trees, the hooting of a wild owl, which could be heard for quite some time, became more and more muffled. He did not remember anything else. By the time Alvarez found Shankar's unconscious body under the cottonwood tree, it was almost dark. First, Alvarez thought Shankar had been bitten by a snake. but he could not see any mark of snakebite on his body. Alvarez looked up and observed the surroundings. With his vast experience of tropical rainforests, B immediately knew what had happened. There was a thick growth of poisonous creepers in that area. Some African tribesmen dip their arrowheads in the juice of this poison. The creeper has a pleasant smell, but breathing in too much of this can paralyze a man. It could even be fatal. Brought back to their tent, Shankar was confined to bed for 3 days. His body was swollen. He had a splitting headache, and his throat was dry all the time. Alvarez said,
"If you had spent the night under the tree, it would have been difficult to save you."
One day, Shankar noticed a few yellow grains on the banks of a rivulet. Alvarez, the skilled prospector that he was, immediately sieved the sand and extracted a few grains of gold. However, he was not excited by the discovery. The quantity of gold was so measly that it would not be worth the trouble. According to Alvarez's calculation, they would get just about 3 ounces of gold from a ton of the mineral. Shankar said, "Still, instead of sitting idle, let's try to extract as much of it as possible." Even 3 ounces of gold is not something to be ignored. But what was a great discovery to Shankar was a petty find to the seasoned prospector in Alvarez. Besides, Shankar's concept of value was different from that of Alvarez. Ultimately, the younger partner had to give up. In the meantime, they wandered about in the forest for over a month. They camped at one place for a few days, and then moved on to another. After searching the new area thoroughly, they shifted to another part of the jungle. One day, they had just pitched their camp at a new spot. Shankar returned to the tent in the afternoon after shooting a few birds. He found Alvarez smoking a cigar, seemingly worried. Shankar said, "Can I say something? If you yourself can't locate the river, let's go back." Alvarez said with a smile,
"The river could not have flown away. It must be here, somewhere in this forest."
"Then why can't we find it?"
"Because we are not searching properly."
"I don't understand, Alvarez. We have combed this forest for the last 6 months. If this is not enough, then what is?" Alvarez replied grimly.
"But there is a problem. Shankar, I have not told you something. 'Cause I did not want to scare you. Please come with me, let me show you something."
Curious and rather anxious, Shankar followed Alvarez. Alvarez went a little way from the tent. He stood under a big tree and said,
"Shankar, we have come here today, have not we?"
The question surprised Shankar. He said, "Yes, of course we have. But what happened? Why do you asking this?"
"Okay, then come closer, and look at the trunk carefully."
Shankar saw someone had carved in the letters, D.A., with a knife on the bark of the tree. But the carving was not fresh, it was at least a month old. Shankar had no clue how such an extraordinary thing could have happened. He looked at Alvarez blankly. Alvarez said,
"You don't understand. Do you? About a month ago, I, myself marked the tree with my initials, because I had my doubts. To you, every forest looks alike. But this means we are going around in circles in this jungle. When such a thing happens, it is difficult to get out."
Shankar understood, but could not believe it. Said, "You mean we passed this place a month ago?"
"Yes, exactly. Such things happen in large forests and deserts. People call them death circles. About a month ago, I suspected that we were trapped in one. I marked the tree to test my hunch. Today, I chanced upon the mark."
Shankar asked, "But what happened to our compass?" How could we lose our way despite having the compass? Alvarez said.
I think our compass is not working. It was possibly demagnetized in a thunderstorm when we were crossing the Richtersfeld.
So, our compass is useless?
Looks like.
Shankar felt their situation was not exactly enviable. The maps were unreliable, their compass was not functioning, and on top of everything, they were trapped in a death circle. There was no one to help them, they had no food, and it was risky to drink the water they found along the way. The only companion that had not left them for a moment was the fear of a terrible death. Jim Carter came in search of treasure and died in this cursed jungle. No good can ever come out of this place. But Alvarez was not someone who could be discouraged. He trekked through the forest relentlessly, day after day. Shankar followed him, his bearings lost. Earlier he had been trying to grasp the geography of the area, but after he knew they had been going around in a circle, he gave up. Mountain of the Moon, written by Bibhuti Bhushan Bandyopadhyay.